welcome back. Welcome back to the show, everybody. So, my next guest will be...
Cheyenne!
Thank you. Okay, so our special presentation tonight is on acupuncture. Does it induce labor? I don't know, but somebody here does. Melanie Halada, please come out.
Cut my life into pieces. This is my last resort. Suffocation, no breathing.
Good to see you. Good to see you. How are you?
Good. It's great to be here.
Good. I heard you were doing an analysis on a study that was looking into that acupuncture and how it affects labor.
Yeah, it was actually quite complicated to actually find the study to begin with. So, we started on this reliable website called Medline. We were able to punch in acupuncture and induced labor into 2 different search bars, combine them together using an N function, and we're able to find a list of studies. Unfortunately, there was only one study. It was a Cochrane review, so it was just a combination of a bunch of studies, and they analyzed it together. So that wasn't quite ideal for what we were looking for.
Right. So how did you get over that hump?
We actually ended up moving over sites, so we moved to PubMed, and we used that one to start looking for it. We typed in acupuncture for induced labor, but that came up with a bunch of results that weren't really accurate, weren't in the time frame we were looking for. So then finally, doing the same thing I did with Medline, we punched in the 2 functions, 2 keywords that we used the AND function, and then we were able to actually find the study that we used, which was the pilot study that we ended up looking at.
Who here's a PubMed fan? So next, you wanted to talk about the introduction to the study and talking about how it started off.
Yeah, it was actually a part of the analysis as well. So the study was actually really well with talking about the relevance and why we needed the study. So it brought up the fact that some other induction forms of labor had resulted in prenatal mortality, and that also the rest of the forms of induced labor weren't very safe. So they were really good at mentioning that why this study was relevant to bring forward. And that the other studies that have been done, that they weren't either considered controlled trials and that they didn't have enough data to actually conclude anything. So it's perfect. And they were actually really good at identifying their primary and secondary outcomes, so the rate of females that were included in the hospital for an induction of labor, and then as well as some more secondary outcomes. And then finally they were good with producing the questions, so the effectiveness of using acupuncture to induce labor.
Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah,
we
thanks
all
for
learned
having
a
me.
lot today. Everyone give her
Thanks.
a hand. My next guest is going to look at the materials and the methods of this study. Here's Kendra. Good to see you. Well, how are you?
Well, I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm decent. So I heard you're talking about methods and materials for this section. Why don't you elaborate on some of that?
Yeah, definitely. So when we looked at the study, kind of the first thing we noticed was that the study was registered by the FDA before they actually started the study. This is really good. It just keeps the researchers accountable and make sure that they're doing everything right. So this is a big plus for the study for sure.
Where was this done?
This was done at a university in Italy. So they really never talked about kind of their demographic of the people that were involved in the study. So we don't know if they were just people native to Italy or if they were people of other ethnic backgrounds. So this is kind of something against the study. So they really should have included kind of what the demographic was and given us some more information on that. In the end, it's probably okay, and we're still considering this a valid study.
Okay, now I was reading about this a bit earlier backstage, and it said something about there being no blinding conducted in this study. Now, normally that's a big problem, but apparently you have an explanation for that?
Yeah, so this study didn't use any blinding, which can you really blame them? It's a little bit difficult to do blinding when it comes to acupuncture, but they could have used this method called sham acupuncture. So in this method, they would have taken one group, and that group would have gotten acupuncture in points that are known to induce labor, and the other group would have gotten acupuncture on points that are not known to induce labor. And this would have kind of maybe helped with the blinding, but in the end, the study probably was fine without the blinding, but it potentially could have affected the validity.
Now, I think the final thing you wanted to mention was something about their statistical methods and how they use statistics in this study.
Yeah, definitely. So they use the t-test and the chi-square test and the Kaplan-Meier survival analysis tests. These are just really strong tests to use for this type of study, so this was definitely good for this study.
So they definitely did choose the proper statistical methods when it came to this.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, this was a great section on the materials and methods. Hey, thank you,
Yeah,
Kendra.
thanks so much.
Everyone give her a round of applause. My next guest, someone beautiful, someone very beautiful. She's going to be talking about the results. Her name is Hannah Miser. Let's get her out here.
What you say?
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So you're here to talk about the results of the study, I think?
Yes, I am. So I'm the lead analyst of the results section, and I actually brought a few figures with me to.
Okay. Well, why don't we pull that up for the folks at home there? Now, what is this figure's importance in terms of the study?
So it was a great figure overall, but it did actually reveal a flaw in the design of the study, and what that revealed was that they stated that they had 202 participants originally, and then they only analyzed 195 because there are some participants that dropped out. So what that means is that they actually did a per protocol analysis instead of an intention to treat analysis, which is preferred.
Now, one of the things that I think I saw was an asset to the study was their analysis of confounding factors. Can you go on to that a little bit?
Yes, that was a good idea for them to check that because it's important to determine whether or not there be any confounding factors that may affect the results of the study. So what we actually looked at, or what they actually looked at, was if there was any significant differences in pre-pregnancy body mass index, or BMI, if there was a difference in maternal age, and a variety of other factors as well. And they also looked at socioeconomic factors, which often gets neglected. It turns out these were all significantly similar between the two groups being observation, which was the control treatment, and acupuncture groups, so the women that actually underwent acupuncture.
Mm-hmm.
So these were all statistically similar.
Okay, well that sounds like a huge asset when we get to primary outcomes, which I think we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, so the primary outcome of the study, which was also mentioned by Melanie, our other analyst earlier, was the rate of women submitted to labor induction for prolonged pregnancy at 41 plus 5 weeks.
Now, what does that 41 plus 5 mean?
So 41 plus 5 means basically 41 weeks plus 5 days, and that's an extremely long time for a woman to be pregnant. And so at that time, they would cut off and say, that's enough, we got to induce pregnancy. As it turns out though, there was no significant effect. It was found that the rate of labor induction was 20% in the observation or control group that didn't have any acupuncture, and 17% in women that did undergo acupuncture. So although there was a 3% difference, this actually wasn't a big enough difference to have a statistical significant impact.
Well, that was very detailed. Do you want to talk about any other, secondary outcomes or any other kind of conclusions in the study?
Yeah, for sure. And for those, I have a few figures.
Okay, we'll have to pull those up. Johnny?
Yeah, so this figure is figure 3, and it's one of my favorite figures of the study because it shows a survival analysis. So a survival analysis is a great way to show data over a period of time and helps avoid the generalization of data by describing only a single time point or just the mean and median when big differences can occur at different time points. So in the survival analysis, we see the gestational age of spontaneous delivery, so that's without any labor induction involved at all, in observation versus acupuncture groups, starting at the inclusion of the study. This is important because it determines whether or not acupuncture can accelerate spontaneous labor induction and reduces the need for pharmaceutically induced labor induction. Despite the careful planning of the researchers to look at this secondary outcome, it was actually found that there was no significant difference in the onset of spontaneous delivery between the observation and acupuncture groups. But, and this is my only critique about the figure itself, is that the researchers word this in their paper as a trend of earlier delivery in acupuncture women because the p-value is 0.092. However, we all know that this is not statistically significant.
Why is that secondary outcome not statistically significant?
So the researchers set their p-value as 0.08, which they claim is the standard for medical studies. And as you can see, though, the p-value is over that. So because that's over 0.08, this is objectively not significant, and they shouldn't have to qualify that by saying a trend.
Now I think you got 2 more figures for us, right? Why don't we put those up right now?
These are the last secondary outcomes we'll talk about today with figure 4 and figure 5 up here. So what these figures are is the duration of first stage and second stage labor between the observation and acupuncture groups. And we actually found that this is not statistically significant.
And that's because of the p-values again, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's because of the p-values. And this was important to assess because the duration of labor may have been affected by the acupuncture. And so the only significant effect that they found is that there was significantly longer second stage labor in nulliparous women, meaning women that haven't had a child before, versus multiparous women, or women who had had a child before, in the observation group here. But this was not the acupuncture group at all, and so this outcome really doesn't answer any questions in the study.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. I think that was a great detailed results section, and thank you very much. Ooh, that is tough. You suck! Okay, our next guest will be Armagon Wasim, and he's going to talk about their analysis of the conclusion of the study. Please help welcome my boy.
Sup.
Welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on.
You're very welcome.
Very humble, very humble. So you had the analysis of the conclusion section. I was just wondering, right off the top, what you kind of thought of the study, and how did you kind of start out with this conclusion?
What I found really interesting about the conclusion was that they basically started off by saying, as the other analysts have already mentioned, their primary endpoint, they told us that it was not met. So acupuncture did not indeed induce labor in the testing group. But what I did find interesting was, although they had a great start to the conclusion by telling us what their results were, a lot of their stuff, even their discussion about nulliparous versus the other group, was completely irrelevant to what they were actually doing. Mm-hmm. My opinion on this, and I feel like my analysts agree, is that they were trying to add some clinical significance to their already statistically insignificant study.
What else can you tell me about their conclusion, kind of towards the end? Is that, you have anything beyond talking about the secondary and primary endpoints?
For sure, yeah. Like we can discuss the external and internal validity, for example.
Okay.
So their internal validity was very well done, I believe, for the most part. They controlled for certain variables like, their socioeconomic status, for example, physiological factors like BMI, age, and stuff like that. But one thing that may affect us in the future may be the fact that, they did not blind, okay. Which, although we believed it would not have much result on the effect, since it's pretty obvious to know that you're being blinded or not.
You mentioned external validity.
Yeah, so with external validity, they also did a great job of everything was great except for the fact that, as mentioned earlier as well, they stayed at the one hospital in Italy, which could affect the results, but they did control very well for confounding, which I found was pretty well done.
Okay. So in conclusion, what would you like to say about the conclusion?
Funny. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Funny.
That's a great joke. The audience is laughing.
One asset to the study is that before discussing their own study further, they analyzed previous studies and used them as a comparison. While I do believe there was a bit of fluff, it did add a lot of relevance to their study, and it does set precedent into showing that this research has been done before. This is more research showing that acupuncture really does not induce labor in post-term women. But I do believe that the one thing they did talk about statistical significance was the fact that the nulliparous group in their control section, the observation group, had a longer duration of labor than the multiparous group. Although it is good that they mentioned something like that, since it is significant and it is part of the results, it really does not help in answering the primary question at all. So realistically, it's pretty irrelevant to the study.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for going over the conclusion. Hey,
You're
stay
welcome.
right there. We're going to come back with all these analysts, and they're going to finally answer the question, does acupuncture induce labor? Thank you. Thanks for staying with us through the commercial, and welcome back. So guys, what's the verdict? Does acupuncture induce labor?
So the study we looked at today, and along with other precedent that they showed us, we can conclude that acupuncture does not lead to the induction of labor in post-term women.
Okay, wow.
And even with all the flaws of the study, such as the use of per protocol over intention to treat, and the fact that there was no blinding, we still believe that this is a valid conclusion.
Okay, well, thank you guys. Thanks for being with us today, and have a good night.